A massive off-cycle redistricting fight could determine control of Congress. Trump fired a federal official for reporting numbers he didn't like. More evidence of an Epstein cover-up from Trump's inner circle. RFK continues his war on vaccines. And finally, I'll break down the right's obsession with Sydney Sweeney. Welcome back to the podcast for the 54% of Americans who regularly vote for progress in every election and want to convince their friends and family members to join our majority. This is Majority 54. I'm Ravi Gupta. Today, I am solo. I'm Stephen A. Smithing this pod because Jason is out. And we're going to start with this big redistricting fight. So over 50 Texas House Democrats have left the state, relocating to Illinois, New York, Massachusetts, which effectively denies Republicans the control and the quorum that they need to vote on a new congressional map. And as background here, what tends to happen is these maps are only drawn during the census periods of time or post-census. And so this is what they would call an off cycle. The special session is set to run until August 19th. And so that's the date to watch, but the governor can call additional special sessions as needed. Now, Texas is a state legislature that typically doesn't meet every year. So this is something to keep an eye on. Obviously, Governor Abbott has made it clear he wants to pass this map, and that Trump has made it clear that he thinks that this map will yield them an additional 5 seats in the House in the midterm elections, which could be decisive. Now, Republicans have threatened legal action. The Texas House Speaker, Dustin Burrows, has signed civil arrest warrants for the absent Democrats. Governor Abbott has asked the Texas Supreme Court to remove House Democratic Caucus Chair Gene Wu from office. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton has threatened legal action to vacate the seats of Democrats who have left the state. We had Representative Talarico on last week. This was his response to all of this.
I've seen the speaker, I've seen the attorney general, Ken Paxton, I've seen the governor, Greg Abbott, put out these statements where they act pretty tough. But when Donald Trump comes calling, all they can do is bend the knee. All they can do is bend over. And I think it's telling that these Republicans act, so tough and strong on social media. But when Donald Trump says jump, they ask how high. And so I'd love to see that same strength, that same fortitude when these Republicans have to stand up to the president. There was a time when I was growing up in Texas where a Texas governor would tell a president not to mess with Texas. But Dustin Burrows and Ken Paxton and Greg Abbott, they are welcoming Donald Trump to mess with Texas in all kinds of ways. And it's unacceptable, and I think they should certainly be ashamed of themselves.
All they do is bend over. That's some racy talk there from Representative Talarico. Maybe he actually did take me up on my recommendation to watch Hunting Wives. Governor Hochul here in New York went on Maddow, and this is what she had to say.
If we refuse to fight for our democracy, then we're doomed to lose it. We don't want our democracy lost. And that's why I am sick and tired of fighting these battles with my hands tied behind my back. I have to deal with the onslaught of attacks on my residents, the loss of health care for millions, children starving because they don't have the SNAP benefits, and seeing the ICE raids with unfettered power walking into our courthouses and our buildings and our schools wearing masks and blaring guns. There's no way to stop this if we don't find a way to have some checks and balance in Washington, because we do not have it now. I'm a New Yorker. I'm from Buffalo. Fighting is second nature to us. I'm not afraid of this. That's why I said bring it on, because Texas, bullies in Texas, are not going to intimidate us now or ever.
All right, so New York is threatening to change their maps. In a second, I'll talk about how feasible that is and under what timeline. But Governor Abbott was asked about this, and here's what he had to say.
Well, certainly it should be somewhat proportional to what the vote is. What is your response to Kathy Hochul, who says that we are at war over Texas and the redistricting push that's going on in Texas?
That's a bunch of crazy bluster. Democrats are freaking out because they are realizing Texas has the authority to redistrict, and we're going to do so in a way that's going to lead to these additional seats that will vote Republican, and they will be serving in Congress in the next session. And so Democrats are freaking out about it, engaging in rhetoric, but I don't think they have the capability of actually living up to it and doing anything about it. Texas will continue to fight for what is right, and that's exactly what we are doing.
So when he says Democrats don't have the ability to do this, he's, I think he's banking on the fact that in the two biggest states here, California and New York, there's rather difficult processes here. It's a little easier in California. So, California utilizes an independent redistricting commission to draw the state's congressional and legislative districts. This is a bipartisan commission. Now, Gavin Newsom has proposed what's called a triggered map. This would be a pre-drawn map anticipated to increase Democratic representation that would take effect only if Texas enacts its proposed GOP favoring map. Now, to implement that plan, Newsom would have to work with the legislature to organize a special election for a statewide ballot measure in November. And this measure would reportedly affirm support for the independent commission, but call for a fair redistricting nationwide. But it would include a trigger that would bring the pre-drawn maps into effect if Texas moves forward with its redistricting efforts. That is more feasible than what is unfortunately the reality in California. So, that's reality in New York. New York utilizes an independent commission too, which only allows for legislative override under certain conditions. Basically, the governor would need to change the redistricting process through a constitutional amendment that would transfer some of the commission's power to the legislature, but only after another state engages in it first would be the trigger for that. Now, amending the state constitution is a lengthy process which requires passage in 2 consecutive legislative sessions. So that means that under that process, you wouldn't get a new map until 2028 at the earliest. So when Governor Abbott is kind of, claiming that, Democrats are all bluster, yada, yada, he's wrong in the sense that, like, long-term Democrats can change these maps, especially ahead of 2028, and probably if everything goes right in California before the next midterm. But it would be hard to get New York and California before then. And so Republicans in their cold calculus feel like they have something to gain from this. Trump was asked about these maps and was pretty straightforward in his assessment.
If Texas redrawing their congressional map would get you 5 safe red seats, means that California, New York, Illinois, and Maryland are all going to redraw their maps to add safe.
Well, they'll do it anyway.
Is it worth it?
Yeah, they'll do it anyway. Why? If we stop over there, they would have done it anyway.
So he's wrong about that. Like in California and New York, these independent commissions would have stayed. And in New York, they beat back previous maps in prior elections that would have helped net Democratic seats. And so this is definitely a tough fight for Democrats, but I think what all people out there are looking for is for Democrats to engage in the fight. Most Democrats I know believe in independent redistricting, bipartisan redistricting, fair redistricting, but don't want to unilaterally disarm. And that's basically my position. I think that the Supreme Court should weigh in and ban partisan redistricting. I think that the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which include mechanisms to that effect, was a really good bill. But if the Republicans are bringing a gun to the knife fight, we've got to fight, in a way that ensures that we have representation in Congress. And so until Republicans are willing to endorse bipartisan independent commissions, then Democrats should fight. And that even if it, you start now and you don't get there till 2028 in New York, if that's the best you can get, let's fight now, right? And if in California, we need to call a special session, get people back right now and rush to get these new maps into effect, do that now. And if any other state, whether it's Maryland or elsewhere, can net seats, they should do that. Not because in isolation that's the right thing to do, but because in the reality that we live in right now, it's the right thing to do. There was this funny moment on Fox News when Jesse Waters attacked Democrats for a district in Austin, a district that actually Republicans drew, but I don't think he knew that. Here's this clip.
And look at one of the Texas districts that Democrats are running away from. They basically drew a highway between Houston and Austin. Even the media is calling them hypocrites.
So, this is the kind of stuff you can expect from Fox News here. And we'll talk in a second about what they've really been spending their time on. We have a whole segment on that later. But something else that went on, at the end of last week, Trump got some bad jobs numbers and GDP numbers. And he fired the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which is in charge of putting out objective data for the government, which includes inflation numbers. And this is rather alarming for a lot of reasons that I'll get into, but Trump went on CNBC and got some pushback on these numbers.
Antiquated, no doubt, and certainly suboptimal, but rigged? Where do you get the notion that it's rigged, or do you have any evidence there?
It is antiquated, but it's also very political. And, I had an election recently where I did very well, won every swing state, won the popular vote, won everything, all right? Won all the counties. It's, I think 87% of the counties were Republican up. That's never happened before. And yet I had to go through hell. And just days before the election, they put out numbers that it was like the country was on fire. It was doing so well. And then they did a revision about 2 weeks later, and the revision was down by almost 900,000 jobs. You remember that? And I said, what would have happened? What would have happened if I lost? Think of it. I would have said they gave phony numbers, and then they revised them a week and a half later.
Those were benchmark numbers, though, Mr. President. That happens. They do that. They do that twice a year. And it reconciles the monthly figures with like the overall numbers, and it was a big number. And obviously,
the numbers were rigged.
So what they're talking about is a standard revision process that the Bureau of Labor Statistics does, because they get a snapshot, but then they get more data in later on, and they say, okay, we've now through our surveys learned that either the jobs numbers are better or worse, and sometimes they're better. Like they revised their GDP numbers recently. That were actually more favorable to Trump. And Spencer Hakimian, who was just on the Last Debate podcast today, tweeted out, hypothetically, if last month's job report was positive, revised upwards 250,000 extra jobs, what are the odds that Trump would have fired the lady to protect the integrity of the data? Now, mind you, the person who was fired was approved by the Senate with 90 plus votes out of 100, including J.D. Vance. So, in a not so distant future, or past, it was accepted that we needed nonpartisan people to head up these bodies. But now we're in a new world where if there's ever any data that Trump doesn't like, then they are going to fire the people putting out that data. And this is dangerous for a few reasons. Obviously, it sets a standard across the board for anybody putting out any data that Trump doesn't like, which means it'll be harder and harder for average citizens to know what's going on. But what we see here is this combined with the Federal Reserve situation where we had one of the 7 governors of the Federal Reserve resign today, which gives Trump the ability to replace one person. And it could give you a sense of who he wants to put in when Powell's term is up in May. He may fire Powell even before then, but let's just say May is when he'll replace the Federal Reserve chairman. What you're going to see potentially here is a combination of factors, both from the fact that he will put in a political appointee who will put out whatever numbers he wants at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which is in charge of, among other things, inflation. He's going to continue pushing tariffs. He's going to continue pushing immigration restrictions. The combination of those two factors pushes up inflation, right? So what will happen is you have decreased immigration, increased tariffs that push up inflation. Come May, or maybe even earlier, he puts somebody in charge of the Federal Reserve, which pushes interest rates down towards 0, which also increases inflation. So you have 3 major inflationary pressures. But what we'll have is a head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics who's going to be putting out numbers that claim that there is no inflation, even when there's a lot of inflation. And that alone is bad because the economy, companies, investors from around the world won't trust the U.S. anymore. But also what you'll have is a situation where people who are on Social Security benefits, which are linked to the CPI inflation number that the Bureau of Labor Statistics puts out, those people are actually, because Trump doesn't want to admit that inflation is going up, they're going to see their Social Security benefits indexed to a lower inflation number than what's actually happening, which means all the costs of food and services and everything are going to go up and up and up, potentially a lot. But their Social Security benefits aren't going to go up enough lockstep with that. So that is a dangerous scenario. And there was already evidence before the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics was fired that there was trouble over there. They were already letting go a lot of people and cutting back on their staff. The latest inflation report that we got had 15% fewer members of the sample that they used for that. So they're already seeing a dip in the quality of the data because of what Trump is doing. And there's just a ton of negative data coming in now inflation. The Fed's preferred inflation number was rose in June to 2.6%, which is above the 2% figure that is the Fed's benchmark. GDP was starting to slow. Retail sales are down. The consumer sentiment put out by the University of Michigan is the lowest level it's been since mid-2022. Job numbers are bad. That's why he fired the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics. The economic uncertainty index has been up, especially it spiked after the April tariff announcements, and it went down a little bit, but it's still way higher than its baseline. The dollar is weaker than it's ever been before. So we've got a lot of bad scenarios here. Trump also went on, well, let me go actually before we talk about some other sort of Trump bubble news here. Kevin O'Leary, who's been a Trump booster, even went on TV and sounded the alarm over this change at the Bureau of Labor Statistics.
We're used to volatility. We had a bad print on jobs. I did not agree on whacking the commissioner. I don't like that. Whacking statisticians makes no sense whatsoever. You don't shoot the messenger. They used to do that in ancient Rome. Bad news, they kill the guy off the horse. You don't need to do that now. It doesn't matter. This is a job where you just print data. So I didn't like that story.
So that's the economic numbers. Now, I think we have growing evidence, if we ever needed any, that Trump is living in a bubble and people are feeding him only information that he wants to hear. From one of that same CNBC interview that we heard earlier, Trump had to get fact checked on his poll numbers as well. Here's a clip from the CNBC interview, and then followed by a clip of Harry Enton, who Trump mentions in that original clip.
Those,
I have the best poll numbers I've ever had.
Among
I
Republicans.
have poll numbers where I'm 71%. I have the best poll numbers. Look,
those are among Republicans.
No. Among Republicans, I'm at 94 and 95%. No, I'm talking about generally. I have the. Let me put it this way: there was a gentleman on Harry Emden yesterday on CNN, and he went crazy over how well Trump was doing. Now, you don't put that on because I think CBS is a shade. Actually, CNN's a shade better than NBC. I think NBC is probably the worst of them all. But if you check CNN tomorrow, watch Harry Emden, and you'll see about the numbers. But that's okay. We have to defend ourselves.
Was the president correct about the polling, though?
No, I don't think the president was correct. I give him a fair shake. I don't give him a positive spin. Look. He is not at the highest point he's ever been. Take a look at his net approval rating, where it is right now. It's negative. He's underwater, right? You compare that to where he was at the beginning of this term. He was 6 points above water. Now he's 9 points below water. If we are comparing him to other presidents at this point in their presidencies, he is the second lowest on record compared only to himself, who does worse. If we're comparing him to other second terms, he's certainly in the bottom of the list, not nearly all the way at the bottom. Richard Nixon was at a worse position at this point. But when you're comparing yourself to Richard Nixon and you're saying that you're doing better than Richard Nixon in your second term, that's not exactly a good position to be in.
All right. Well, so that's the poll numbers. Now, we've got more stuff happening on the Epstein front here. So Ghislaine Maxwell has been transferred to what's called the Club Fed minimum security prison in Texas. Robert Hood, who's a former warden of the Supermax prison, told the Washington Post that this place that Maxwell was sent to is a country club. It's got Elizabeth Holmes there. He said someone gave special preference to Maxwell that, to my knowledge, no other inmate currently in the Federal Bureau of Prisons has received. MAGA media is starting to warm to Maxwell. Here's a clip from Newsmax.
Oh boy, there he is again. Jeffrey Epstein. Annoying story, isn't it, in so many ways, and kind of infuriating. All right. He beat the system kinda in death. Total monster. I believe it. Yeah, monster. He pled guilty to that horrible, sick stuff. But that doesn't mean that Ghislaine Maxwell is guilty. And there is a hell of a lot of evidence out there that she's innocent, and a hell of a lot of evidence that they railroaded her. Part of a deep state media hysterical plot. And I don't like it. And I don't care if it's unpopular. In fact, I'm kind of really impressed with President Trump right now that he won't be boxed in when it comes to this story.
So this is what inner MAGA sounds like now, where they're starting to defend Maxwell. This comes as, and we're recording this Wednesday midday. It's been reported this morning that White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles, Vice President J.D. Vance, Attorney General Pam Bondi, FBI Director Kash Patel, and Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche are expected to meet tonight, Wednesday evening, at Vance's residence to discuss the Trump administration's strategy related to the Epstein case. They're already starting to leak elements of the Maxwell interview, indicating that Maxwell said that she had heard nothing about Trump. And so you got to think that, one could ask the question about, well, the timing of her move to a minimum security prison and then leaking favorable information to Trump, like, are those two things connected? We obviously talked last week about this. Chuck Todd tweeted, any attorney general or FBI director who had an ounce of integrity would realize this is a terrible look, both legally and politically. Imagine Harris and Zients hold a meeting with Garland and Wray about Epstein. There would be House hearings the next day. And so there just continues to be super suspicious activity regarding Trump and his administration and Maxwell, Epstein. It feels like a cover-up. And again, like, the question is, how many people in Trump's orbit are going to push him for this? I continue to think that the sort of outer perimeter of MAGA, Schultz, Rogan, people like that are going to be critical here, like continuing to sound off on this. Like, those people, I think, have the largest influence right now and are the most likely to go one way or the other. And if they show integrity and continue to push this and hold Trump to the standards that he laid out during the campaign, then this can continue to be a liability for him. Before we go to break, I'm going to play a trailer for a new partnership. So I'm partnering with the Midas Touch Network to do a 5-part series all about the 20th anniversary of the Hurricane Katrina and how the schools have changed down there in the past 20 years. And so I'm going to kick it to that trailer, and then you'll hear our ads, and then we'll be back to talk about RFK's crazy mRNA decision and the Sydney Sweeney controversy, all of that and more when we come back.
20 years ago, our nation watched the city drown.
New Orleans is getting hit very hard. A lot of objects flying through the air here, including things like siding.
Incredible amount of water coming in with this. Winds been gusting 100 to 20 miles an hour in some cases. Just a howling, screeching wind. Almost makes your ears pop a little bit.
Hurricane Katrina was the deadliest storm in American history.
To wake up the next morning and hear that your city's just gone, it was a shock.
I lost everything. Everybody in my family lost everything.
There was military helicopters overhead. All the street lights were still out. It was eerie. It just was kind of this like odd post-apocalyptic kind of feel.
So I turn on my little 13-inch black and white TV. I heard Bob Brick say something to the effect that, like, if people don't leave, there won't be enough body bags.
The storm drowned homes, neighborhoods, entire communities. It swept away the city's schools. Gone too were the rituals and traditions that connected generations. How do you rebuild a city without its schools? Where the Schools Went is a new podcast from The Branch in partnership with the 74 and Midas Touch. It's the story of what happens when an entire school system disappears and a city is forced to start over.
We were constantly updating addresses because our kids were constantly moving from a shelter to a hotel to maybe a church and then maybe to an apartment.
The littlest kids would hide under the desk. The older kids, they were too cool to do things like hide under the desk, but they were flinched.
We could not occupy the first floor because of the standing water.
You're being shot out of a cannon every morning when you wake up.
What followed was the most dramatic school makeover our country has ever seen. Some call it a tragedy.
If your goal was to break up the black community, break up the black power structure, take wealth from an already poor community, then yes, it was a beautiful success.
Others, a miracle.
This community has actually used the crisis as an opportunity to start rebuilding and try to experiment with new ways of learning.
Over the course of this series, we'll trace the story from chaos to reinvention. We'll meet the educators, families, students, and critics who lived it. And we'll ask, What do we owe each other when everything falls apart? Where the Schools Went, available wherever you get your podcasts. Episode 1 drops August 12th.
When we relaunched this podcast, it seemed like we had to figure it all out on our own. Scripts, setups, filming schedules, logos. It was super overwhelming, and every day it seemed like we had a new decision that needed a new answer. And when you're starting off with something new, it seems like your to-do list keeps growing every day with new tasks, and that list can easily begin to overrun your life. Finding the right tool that not only helps you out, but simplifies everything can be such a game changer. For millions of businesses, that tool is Shopify. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world and 10% of all e-commerce in the US, from household names like Mattel and Gymshark to brands just getting started. The Midas Touch Network is proud to have their own store using the Shopify platform. You can get started with your own design studio with hundreds of ready-to-use templates. Shopify helps you build a beautiful online store to match your brand style, accelerate your content creation. Shopify is packed with helpful AI tools that write product descriptions, page headlines, and even enhance your product photography. Now get the word out like you have a marketing team behind you. You could easily create email and social media campaigns whenever your customers are scrolling or strolling. And best yet, Shopify is your commerce expert with world-class expertise in everything from managing inventory to international shipping to processing, returns, and beyond. Turn your business idea into with Shopify on your side. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/majority. Go to shopify.com/majority, shopify.com/majority. All right. It might have been easy to miss, but RFK Jr. continues to make news over at HHS. Here's his latest announcement.
After reviewing the science and consulting top experts at NIH and FDA, HHS has determined that mRNA technology poses more risks than benefits for these respiratory viruses. That's why, after extensive review, BARDA has begun the process of terminating these 22 contracts totaling just under $500 million.
So this comes on the heels of the Department of Health and Human Services revoking nearly $600 million in a contract to Moderna to develop a vaccine against the bird flu. So you now have $500 million for mRNA vaccines, $600 million for bird flus. Now, this doesn't need to be a biochemistry lecture, but essentially, like, the mRNA vaccines are perhaps our fastest and best way to develop and deploy vaccines for a host of different potential public health disasters. The AP interviewed Mike Osterholm, who's a University of Minnesota expert on infectious disease and pandemic preparations. He said, "I don't think I've seen a more dangerous decision in public health in 50 years in the business." He noted that mRNA offers advantages of rapid production, which I was talking about, which is crucial in the event of a new pandemic. And so this is deeply, deeply disturbing. RFK Jr. made this announcement in Anchorage, Alaska, next to that state's two senators. He called for a universal vaccine, RFK did, that mimics natural immunity. And needless to say, we don't need to go into this. That is pie in the sky thinking. And this is, we're playing with fire here. We talked about FEMA the past few weeks. We talk about this. Like, we are just begging for, as a country, a disaster, whether it's a new pandemic or a natural disaster or Lord knows what else, like, terrorism or other threats to national security that could slip by when we have our FBI and Department of Justice as fixated and distracted on going after their political enemies, as what we've seen, or what happened at the Pentagon, where they're pushing out tons of career capable people because Laura Loomer doesn't like them, which we've had some more news on that over the past few weeks. So we have like a podcaster, YouTube conspiracy theorist calling the shots in our nation's national security apparatus. So we are begging for a disaster in this country, and it's quite scary. In a perhaps more trivial matter, we've had this growing controversy over Sydney Sweeney, the actress. Here is just a little bit of a clip of an American Eagle ad that seems to have kicked off this latest controversy.
Genes are passed down from parents to offspring, often determining traits like hair color, personality, and even eye color. My genes are blue.
Sydney Sweeney has very genes.
So you might not be following this at all, especially if you're on the left, because what's happened here is the right wing, Fox News, et cetera, are playing wall-to-wall coverage here of this Sydney Sweeney thing and pretending as if this is what liberals are really concentrating on right now, which certainly doesn't seem to be my experience. Brian Stelter tweeted that Fox News mentioned Sydney Sweeney in her ad 766 times in the span of a week. Epstein's name just came up 53 times. So I mentioned this not because I'm doing a segment on how appalled I am by Sydney Sweeney's ad, because I honestly don't have an opinion about it. I think it's just a normal ad. I know that people are trying to read tea leaves in this and talk about it being some kind of white supremacist, yada, yada, yada. I have no reason to think it's any of that. And even if it were, it certainly doesn't rise to the level for me. It seems like a normal racy ad for jeans, and given the backlash that Fox News and other right-wing commentators really, really want to pretend is there from the left, it'll probably only help American Eagle anyway. David Packman tweeted, "Is anyone on the left actually upset about Sydney Sweeney? I couldn't care less and haven't met a single person who does. Another manufactured scandal." But the right really wants to pretend that this is a scandal. Here's a clip from Fox News just to give you a sense of the tenor of the discussion over there.
And you know how this ends. She's going to marry Barron. And it's going to create the greatest political dynasty in American history. Oh, my gosh.
So that's how they're talking. And then here's how Megyn Kelly's talking about this.
Finally, we have an actual woman with amazing breasts and an obviously kick-ass body who is in a dress or in her jeans, whatever. And it's wonderful.
So, and the Daily Show had fun, juxtaposing that with all the different ways in which Megyn Kelly has gone after people on the left who've kind of exposed themselves in various ways, and how that coverage has been different. But again, like, they want liberals and Democrats being appalled by this. I have not met a single person who really gives a crap about this at all, except people on the right who want to pretend like there's this major uproar on the left about this. And what do you do when people ask you about this? It's to just be honest and say, I have no idea what this is. I don't have an opinion on it. And there was also, it came out that Sydney Sweeney might have been registered Republican. And you just be like, who cares? Like, I assume that actors and actresses are going to span the political spectrum. And I don't have a litmus test when I watch a movie based on somebody's politics. That's my recommendation to you on stuff like this. But again, like, they want this. Like, the right wants any excuse whatsoever to talk about anything else. A ton of politicians like Nancy Mace have been putting up, tweets and photos like leading into this controversy. Mace has one where she's wearing jeans, and it says Nancy Mace for governor has great jeans, and she's shooting a gun. So it's these are the kinds of things that I'm seeing out there in the political spectrum. And again, like, you can always find in a country of hundreds of millions of people somebody on the left getting appalled by this, but that is in no way representative of even a sliver of what Democrats and liberals are paying attention to right now. So manufactured scandal. But that's all we have for today. We got no Jason today, so I'll spare you too much out there. Remember to listen to The Game Within, which is our sports podcast. It's on the Valor Media Network. It streams live at 2:30 p.m. Central Time on Mondays, and you can get the audio by subscribing to The Game Within. You heard the ad earlier for Where the Schools Went, which drops its first episode. This is our podcast about the 20th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina. I've been lucky to partner with the 74 and the Midas Touch guys on that, and you're going to learn a lot about our schools, not just in New Orleans, but all around the country there. And if you haven't yet, leave a 5-star review and say what you love about the podcast. And remember, we all have a platform. Make sure to use yours today.